Hi, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody. I am Jennifer Lynn Purcell, aka Ever Changing Butterfly, bringing to you Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD. I don't know if you're a new listener or not, but I would like to share with you where I get most of my articles for this podcast. I have recently learned this year about a nonprofit that I would really like to help. It's the NBLD Project. In addition to doing research on NBLD and working to get it back on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that is the DSM, it provides support groups for those with NBLD. You can find the NBLD Project at www.nbld.org. All proceeds from the ads and from listeners who donate to the NBLD Project will go towards them. I will include the link for this in the description of the podcast. And also the donate button on the website for this podcast goes directly to the donate page on the NBLD Project's website. So if you want to, you can use that button as well to donate to them. Okay, so today's episode will be about discussing the history of autism, Asperger's, and NLD. I thought I would kind of do this because it kind of gives you a background of all of the LDs, if you would, that are similar to NLD. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar in some ways because autism and Asperger's do have some of the same social areas with NLD, where usually people who have them do have challenges with social cues like people who have NLD. So, and I would say people who have autism and Asperger's can be gifted in math or science also, just like people who have NLD can be gifted in having really good audio memory or being able to memorize numbers or dates or names really well, like I do like that is true for me. So I just thought I would share that a little bit in the beginning. And if you want to learn more about the podcast, the name for the website is Living with NLD or livingwithnld.com. So I read an article titled "Who was the first person to be diagnosed with autism?" about the history of autism to discover when the first person was diagnosed with it. It started in 1933 when Donald Triplett was sent to an institution to be 50 miles away from his family in Mississippi. After being there for a year, his parents removed him. Even the people in the institution told them not to do that. So the parents were removing Donald from the institution against the people who were working for the institution's wishes. But see what happens. The parents wanted to find answers and help for Donald. They did find help for him from Dr. Kanner, I think I'm saying that correctly, quote, who was one of the nation's top psychiatrists, end quote. He was able to let his parents know why he was behaving the way he was. So, me personally, I have worked with children and adults on the ASD spectrum. They were clients who have high, or not have, but have high and low functioning nonverbal and verbal symptoms, aggressive and not aggressive at all. So they were varying in those circumstances. I want to tell you about one of the clients that I had. He had autism and ADHD. He was 7. And he would have tantrums that would last about 3 hours. He would usually be aggressive towards me and my coworker, so we would have to defend ourselves in order to not get hurt. One time I didn't block because I wasn't expecting it, and he kicked me in my private part. This made me learn to block my body anytime he had a tantrum. This was one of my hardest clients because I would feel empathetic for him because I felt like I could relate to him since I have NLD. I'm not saying NLD is the same thing as autism because they are different from each other, but I can relate because I know what it's like to have a challenging life. Just like I had said in the beginning, there are differences between NLD and autism. But when one has NLD or autism or Asperger's, their brain is wired differently. So they know that they still have challenges in their life, and therefore they're different from neurotypicals. They are neurodiverse, and therefore the neurodiverse people will be able to relate to each other and will be like, hey, I can understand why you're having challenge with, maybe trying to clean your room or trying to do this math problem or trying to tie your shoelaces, simple fine motor skills sort of thing. So Asperger's was discovered in the 1940s, but wasn't added to the ASD spectrum until 1994. I got this info from an article titled Asperger's Syndrome. Quote, Asperger's syndrome, also known as Asperger's disorder, was first described in the 1940s by Venice pediatrician Hans Asperger. Okay, it was probably named after him, who observed autism-like behaviors and difficulties with social and communication skills in boys who had normal intelligence and language development, end quote. And you have probably heard of this individual before. Temple Grandin is one of the most widely known people with Asperger's. I have watched a movie about her that was done in 2010. It was very well done. I learned a lot about her and Asperger's from it. I learned that she is very gifted in math and has helped cows and people in many ways. I was able to understand what Asperger's is and how it can affect a person's life better. I don't want to spoil it too much if you haven't seen it, though. But I would encourage you to see it if you want to get a better understanding of Asperger's and what it's like to have it, because it does give you a really good look at what it's like to have Asperger's and what it's like to be in somebody's mind, if you will, when you have Asperger's. In an article titled Estimated Prevalence of Nonverbal Learning Disability Among North American Children and Adolescents, they say that 2.2 to 2.9 million people have NVLD. It was first described in 1967. I think there are more than that many who have an LD because they have probably gone either misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed, or undiagnosed, I should say. This has to do with NLD being hard to understand by scientists, psychologists, and psychiatrists. I also think that because there isn't as much research out there about NLD, it's harder for people to have it and their loved ones to know where to go to look for it. Whenever I do research for this podcast, I try to use reliable resources because I want my audience to be able to trust what they're listening to and the information I provide for them. I also provide them with a link to the article so that they can read them if they desire. This lets them decide how credible they are. I think the book NLD from the Inside Out, the third edition by Michael Brian Murphy, the author has NLD and gives a history of it, and provides some good information about it. Following is a summary of the book from Amazon. Quote, NLD from the Inside Out fully explains nonverbal learning disability to anyone who has that diagnosis or who wants to understand it better. Michael Brian Murphy offers practical advice and strategies for school, relationships, and life after graduation. He writes with authentic voice about a diagnosis that he shares with many other teens and adults. This inside look at NLD contains wisdom, clarity, and humor that will inspire those with NLD as well as parents, teachers, and therapists. Author Judith Canty-Graves and Carson Graves, co-authors of Parents Have the Power to Make Special Education Work. This book will be an eye-opener for teachers, parents, and other interested readers. No doubt many will realize, now I understand, and hopefully that understanding will contribute to the success of children and adults with NLD. It's also a valuable resource for young people with NLD, real-life voices, experiences, and common sense. As the parent of an adult with children with disabilities, I've learned that the true experts in the field are people with disabilities. Yeah, that's true. Mr. Murphy's book ably demonstrates that fact. Bravo, says the author Katie Snow, author of Disability is Natural, Revolutionary Common Sense for Raising Successful Children with Disabilities. End quote. I would recommend reading this book with someone who isn't neurotypical because some of it may be hard to understand depending on your reading level or knowledge if you have NLD and on your vocabulary. If you do read it with someone else, then you can talk to them about it and you'll be able to bounce off ideas off of them about the book and NLD. So whether you have NLD, ASD, or Asperger's, your life will be challenging to varying degrees, but your life can have positive aspects in it from the areas that you're gifted in. As I wrap up today, there are some things I would like to share with you. And hey, I want to share with you, before I wrap up, the positive areas that I think for NLD that I enjoy my life. I enjoy being able to remember things really well with audio memory, and I also enjoy being able to remember people's names really well. And sometimes, I do have difficulty with remembering somebody's name, and when I do, it bugs me. And I will try to Google it if it's like like something from a movie, like a character's name, and because if I don't remember it, it will keep bugging me or annoying me, I should say. And I do that because usually if I don't remember it, I will stop thinking about it until I remember it. So that's, I guess, a little pet peeve of mine, I guess you could say, that's related to NLD. But, if I didn't have NLD, I don't think I would be me. I don't think I would be Jennifer Lynn Purcell. I wouldn't be able to remember the really detailed things that have happened to me in my life, whether they're positive or not. But I think that's a good thing because it helps me remember parts of my life better and learn from them better than maybe somebody who is neurotypical. And I'm not saying that neurotypicals can't learn from their life. I'm just saying that I learned from my life maybe in a different way than they do, because I can remember granular details about my life that a neurotypical might not necessarily remember. So that's a little way for you to imagine what a life of somebody who has NLD other than just listening to this podcast. So, yeah. So as I wrap up, I do have a website for the podcast, like I said in the beginning of the episode. It is called livingwithnld.com. I would love to know what is your challenge you usually run into when you're trying to do research on NLD and other LDs on the ASD. Do you usually run into, it's hard to find research about NLD because there's not that much out there, and I think that's because it's still being researched on, and people are still trying to understand it, and therefore it as they're still trying to understand it, they're trying to make sure that the research that they're putting out there is accurate. Like I said, I try to make sure that the research that I put out there for these podcasts is reliable and accurate as well. So that's probably why there's not that much research out there for you to read about NLD, unfortunately. But be grateful that there is any research, period, is what I would say. So please share to the level of comfortability that you have on the difficulty that you run into when you're trying to do research on NLD or other LDs on ASD. And if you're listening on Spotify, you can send me an email at livingwithnld@gmail.com. Or if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave the answer and a review for me. If you're listening on livingwithnld.com, comment on the episode on the podcast page, because that page is created as a blog, so you can comment on the episodes. And in conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience, if you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast. Maybe you have NLD yourself and would like to be showcased on the podcast. What are you interested in learning about NLD? Maybe you want to shoot me an email with some topics that you think I should cover on the podcast. I would love to hear from you. I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. And as always, I will give the links for you to the articles in the description. And I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and Happy New Year. I will see you next Friday. Bye.